So let's continue with our psychology journey. And so today we'll be discussing perceptual organization. So in the last video we discussed sensation and perception, and then we clearly now understand the difference between the two terms. But today what we'll be doing is we'll be understanding how we organize our perception, and then we're calling that perceptual organization. And so in organizing our perception, or in perceptual organization, there are certain things that you need to know, or there are certain ways in which human beings perceive certain stimuli. And so the major concept I want you to be aware of is this idea of Gestalt psychology. And so Gestalt psychology is this way in which human beings organize information by structurally assorting, or let me say structurally assorting those pieces of information into coherent units, and then making an entire picture out of those individual units. Or in simple words, what I'm trying to say is that there's this idea in Gestalt psychology that the whole is greater than the parts. What that means is that the way human beings understand things, the greater picture is much more important than the individual aspects, because human beings are trying to be as efficient as possible, and so they will not waste time analyzing the individual aspects. Instead, we care about the entire picture. And so because we care about the entire picture, this has made our brains very efficient in understanding the world around us. However, this makes us liable to illusions, of which we'll discuss them later on. And so Gestalt psychology is attributed to a psychologist by the name of Max Weathermeyer. So Max Weathermeyer came up with this idea. So the major idea was that the whole is greater than the individual parts. And so Gestalt psychology has two main ideas. So the first idea is this idea of the figure-ground relationship. So the figure-ground relationship is this idea that whatever you choose to focus on, or let me say in whichever image you're looking at, you can have two things. You can have the figure, and you can also have the ground or the background. And then whichever one is the figure or the background depends on you and depends on your perspective. And then a good way of analyzing this is looking at Rubin's vase. So look at this vase here. And then some may say that they are seeing a vase. Yeah, that's fine. That would mean the vase is the figure, and then everything else is the background. And then some might say that they are seeing two faces looking at each other, and those faces will be the figure, and then the rest will be the background. So that's an example of the figure-ground relationship. Another way in which we organize our perception is following Pragnan's principles. So Pragnan's principles are these principles that we tend to analyze data in the simplest way possible. So human beings will always look for the simplest explanation for things, right? And so we call those Pragnan's concepts. And so when analyzing Pragnan's concepts, there are several laws that we need to take into account. The first one is the law of closure. So in closure, what we're saying is that human beings will tend to complete the picture. So there are certain images or patterns that are not complete, and then our brains will tend to complete them for us. And then here's an example. So are you able to see that even though this image is not complete, your brain has completed it? Here's another example. Yeah, so we're able to see. The next one is similarity. So the law of similarity says that let me say forms or images that are more similar will be grouped as being more related. And this one is quite common sense. And then you can be able to see in this diagram that these are considered to be more related than those, right? And then there's the law of proximity. So the law of proximity states that objects or figures or parts that are more proximal to each other will be considered as more related. So in understanding this set of information, you will not say this is more related to that. Instead, you say, oh, there's a group of that, there's a group of... Are you getting the idea? Yeah, so there's also the law of continuation. So in the law of continuation, we tend to perceive certain patterns as being continuous, especially when certain things are taken into account, like the colors, right? So you'll be able to see in this example, that's what's going on. There's also the aspect of common fate. So what does common fate means? Common fate means that objects that are moving in the same direction are considered to be more related. And then there's also aerial perspective. So aerial perspective is also an important one. It's an assumption that distant objects tend to appear blurry or bluish in nature. Okay, it's not really an assumption. It's actually how we interpret distant figures. So we tend to perceive them as being more blurry, right? Or tend to perceive them as being more bluish, as you can see in that illustration. And then lastly, we have the linear perspective. So the linear perspective is a cue in depth, right? That is seen whenever you have two parallel lines that meet. And so you'll be able to perceive these lines as meeting at a distance, even though they are not really meeting at a distance. And so we call that linear perspective. And so that will mark the end of this video.